And I see there's been some amazing comments and stories and sharing going on in the chat. And even if we can't get to everything that you're adding today, if you message us at the end, if there's still concerns that you have, I would be happy for us to get back in touch with you and make sure that we can make something happen if we need to. So resilience and positive psychology are aspects relating to be able to survive a traumatic stress and develop a new normal. Resilience is often described as the ability to bounce back or overcome adversity. Factors associated with resilience include autonomy and being realistic, optimistic, pragmatic, socially connected, and a sense of meaning and purpose.
Good. I can't seem to get the camera working. I don't get what's going on.
So those are important factors for resilience, because resilience doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes peer support, and the skills that we focus on to build, maintain, and sustain that resilience are important. So whistleblowers, like combat veterans, are often traumatized and can get stuck in whistleblower mode, something we were talking about a little bit earlier. And we don't want them to get stuck in a way that impedes their ability to experience joy and other aspects of their lives. So the experiences and coping skills utilized by other whistleblower survivors can foster post-traumatic growth in those that they mentor. The techniques such as mindfulness practice, advocacy activities, humor, storytelling, and networking are means of taking control over a hostile and adversarial experience in order to find peace of mind. So as we begin, and as Dave gets settled, I'm going to ask each of you to quickly introduce yourselves. I know some of you know Christian, so I'll start with her and just ask her to briefly say hello.
Well, hi, I'm Christian Greene. I'm a whistleblower in DC Child Welfare. I used to be an ombudsman to investigate the agency to determine if they were within policy, procedure, and law regarding children's rights in the district, specifically foster children. And I whistleblew to a variety of entities, but essentially in regards to a report that was due to the public about children in foster care's rights being protected. I was retaliated against, and so I began a journey of requesting legislative change, which just took place this last year, was fully funded through the legislative process, and is to open an ombudsperson for children in the District of Columbia come October 2021. So that's the highest level overview I could give of the situation.
All right, Ted.
Yes, I'm Ted Blickwedel. I'm a retired Marine and combat veteran. I worked at the VA in the Vet Center program for about 9 years between 2009 and 2018. And I took early retirement 3.5 years ago because of excessive productivity metrics counselors were expected to meet, which were burning them out and compromising quality care for veterans and their families. And as time went on, I'd worked with my congressional delegates, with local and national media, interviews I had conducted, including NBC, Military Times, and NPR to kind of galvanize support, which finally did result in the GAO conducting investigation after work I'd done with my congressional staff in Rhode Island, which actually resulted in validating my allegations with recommendations, which has since led to a bill being drafted on both the House and Senate side of Veterans Affairs entitled the Vet Center Improvement Act of 2021. So that's in committee right now, being worked. Hopefully will be voted on before the end of the year. And along the way, I've had continued whistleblowing retaliation, which unfortunately this spring has caused me to have to hire a law firm. The more recent incident involving a no trespass order, which was fraudulent in nature, from its very inception, and I finally won that legal battle, and it has been rescinded, and I'm moving on with action against the VA and other individuals that were responsible for perpetrating all of this. And I'm actually co-authoring a book about this entire experience entitled Broken Promises, which is the antithesis of keeping the promise that the VA tries to promote, and hopefully that will be published sometime next year.
All right, thank you. And Dave, being that we now have you, can you hear us? And can you
Yes.
take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm David Tenenbaum, and I work for the U.S. Army, what used to be the Tank Automotive Command in Warren, Michigan. And do you want me to go into anything now? Or do you want me to
Just a brief overview, introduction, and then we're going to go into some Q&A.
Okay. And I'm considered a whistleblower. I was retaliated against in the late 90s, 95, 96. I'm an engineer, I'm a chemical bioengineer, and I had been working with Germany and Israel. And I told people at the time, I wrote a report that said, if the Humvees go into battle, if we ever get into a battle situation, the way they are, soldiers are going to die. And people didn't like that. And then it led to my being accused of treason. And I was actually suspended from my job for a number of months. And I think I met Jackie. It's been a year or so ago, I think, Jackie.
Yeah, about
And
that.
Jackie's been great because I got connected with her, and I've been actually dealing with my case for. Somebody once said to me, you're the poster child for whistleblowers, and I thought that was pretty funny. Then I thought, wow, it's pretty sad. It's about 24 years I've been dealing with the government. As a matter of fact, right as I was listening to everything going on here, I got another email from the person I'm supposed to be working for, just constantly being harassed about things. But I wrote a book, and it's called Accused of Treason, the U.S. Army's Witch Hunt for a Jewish Spy. And I can get into more later on, but any questions you have, please feel free to ask.
Okay, and June, I have saved you for last because I did that on purpose because I wanted to first acknowledge that June is probably joining us. My geography isn't so great, but I think June is joining us from South Africa, which puts us on probably the furthest point on the globe. And then I think we have people that have logged in from Australia. So I feel like we've had folks from the UK this morning. I think I've seen some Canadians logged in. They're not even considered that far away anymore because June has brought us this international experience. And I would just love for you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm very humbled to be here amongst everybody that's been talking today and tomorrow. So thank you very much for the opportunity and the platform. As you said, I'm from South Africa, Johannesburg. In 2017, I whistleblew at Samsung. And, 2 weeks later, my identity was leaked directly to the director that I also blew against. They have an internal auditing system, and which was supposed to protect me. But I spent the next year going through all the toxic tactics that you've mentioned, the bullying, victimization, colluding. Serendipitously, though, at the same time, I was studying to become a mindfulness practitioner and trainer. And towards the end of the year, as they do, they put you on poor performance, dismissal hearing, and I was dismissed a year later. So that was 2018. And ever since then, so I'm a relatively new whistleblower, I think, to this foray of people in this area, especially you, David. And what I'm doing now is, because what happened to me, the internal process that is supposed to have protected me was absolutely disastrous. And I reached out over 100 times to different persons, HR auditing, and career themselves. And what happened is literally nothing. It was, we can't do anything for you. And they just let the wheels in South Africa turn, and they got me out that way. So my message now is to share, warn, and inform, Samsung's nearly 300,000 global employees not to trust the system. And on top of that, I haven't, can't afford an attorney, financially ruined, the whole, as the story goes. So I've been teaching myself as I need to, as I go along, what I need to do. I've had 2 or 3 attorneys that have always tried to push me towards settling with an NDA in place, which I refused. So, where I am right now is effectively, defending myself. So lots to learn, lots still more to do, I think. But also I've already managed to, defend myself against having, property taken away, vehicles taken away, which I don't think has been done before. So I've set some precedents here that I'd like to, share with others, those that are coming behind us. And that's where the advocacy has come in, because there's such a massive opportunity here. I'd never thought in my life I would be in this position, but now that I'm here, let's see what we can do with it.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And Christian, there you are. I almost forgot.
Hello.
So what you started off by saying earlier that you were the whistleblower against DC child welfare, and that was life-changing. So how do you just begin to cope with the uncertainty and reinvent your life?
Well, I started, I guess my whistleblowing journey kind of started as I just thought I was doing my job. So once I realized that retaliation went along with doing my job as the ombudsman for the agency, I realized that, sorry, my monitor was about to turn off. I started to have to plan. So I made really definitive steps to protect my family before I made the biggest moves in my whistleblowing. And for me, it was essential because of the fact that the easiest way to discredit a whistleblower in child welfare was to say, well, you can't even take care of your own child. And so that was a huge concern for me, especially since I lived within the district that I was reporting on. So it really came down to a safety and risk assessment. I started with my family, and then I started to make financial decisions that I thought would keep me afloat if the worst were to come, which was to lose my job. And I was pretty certain that was going to happen. Also, the retaliatory actions were so great at my agency that I purposely took a step of writing an email. It was the last real email to leadership that in my mind was either you come in line with the requests of the office and to protect our children, or they're going to tell me they're going in a different direction. And I was terminated without cause because I didn't refuse any directives. I didn't do anything wrong. And they were aware I didn't do anything wrong. And then I had to work on figuring out what the next steps look like. How do I accomplish the goal? And for me, that was directly related to legislative changes. And so I also was vetting out attorneys. What I found is that my case was kind of large in the sense not many people understand the intricacies of child welfare. And given that there was so many misunderstandings about it and that child welfare in the district was already in front of the federal courts for failing the children of the District of Columbia, I was told my case was too large, but no one would tell me, no, you don't have a case. They just told me, we can't dedicate the resources. So I initially filed pro se, and then I stumbled upon Jackie, who put me into the limelight of some attorneys, and I was able to get the resources for Gap represents me for my advocacy work, and I have a private attorney for my litigation, Doug Hartnett, who's absolutely wonderful. And I think finding people in the community that believe in your cause can be very instrumental to being successful in litigation or just in advocacy. I also took a very decisive step to use my litigation as a pressure point for further change in the system. I knew when it accomplished legislation through a court order, but I did know the political pressures in DC would be in my favor the more public I was able to make the issue. And so for me, moving on really looked like, how do I stay on a path that maybe no one really truly understands, but they're willing to kind of go on the ride with me, and finding people like that. And for me, that was my attorneys and Jackie, and then some of my friends who knew that they could lose their career over their connection with me. So it always happened behind closed doors, but to have their support was extremely powerful for me. And so I think moving forward was being able to say, I'm dedicated to this very clear cause, and I have a path to accomplish it. And then when I accomplish it, the personal litigation and other things really would take a back seat, like the pressure raised. So I guess long and short of my answer would be that identifying your personal safety concerns, addressing that before you make any other steps, and having a clear vision, and making sure the information you have is really solid, because that's going to be the core of how you move forward.
Thank you. So Ted started to tell us a little bit about his story that while working at the VA Vet Center and the ongoing retaliation. But something that Ted and I have talked about as well is what kind of emotional healing techniques are there? And I know you've had some experience with doing some really interesting emotional healing. So can you share a little bit about what those techniques are?
Sure. Basically, the techniques I have found to be most effective in dealing with trauma are really cutting edge. In fact, along the lines of energy psychology interventions, which most popular is emotional freedom techniques, which is ways of learning how to use acupuncture points on your body, not to be confused with, well, acupoints, not to be confused with acupuncture, you know, and doing certain kinds of tapping while you're holding certain things and vision about certain traumatic experiences, while you're intentfully releasing that through certain statements and setup phrases that you're using as you go through the process. Very effective. A lot of research out there that's really starting to validate that now. And in general, you know, anything that somatically is dealing with trauma, because trauma is stored in the energy cells of, you know, energetically stored in the cells of the body and in our organs, and that's what needs to be released and shifted. And so these energy psychology interventions are very effective. In fact, some forms of yoga is as well, along with Qigong, quite frankly, which I find rather profound, because with wisdom healing Qigong as taught by Master Ming Tong Gu out in Santa Fe. In fact, the site out there for the center is chicenter.com, C-H-I, the word center all run together.com. It speaks for itself. You can just navigate the site and see when you're combining certain movements, certain organ sound healing techniques. You're really combining, you know, yoga, meditation, and different kinds of somatic processing all at the same time, which is automatically shifting things without even having to talk about them. So there's a lot of different things going on in that way. And I'm actually getting back into some Qigong programs right now. And I think also along with that, just having a healthy lifestyle, I think is important to really benefit from all of these things anyway. And you know, having a good diet and exercise program, I think, is very important. health-wise, probably the single most important thing you can do that really allows everything else to work and to be able to benefit from it.
So one of the other stories you told me was about your little nature hike. You want to talk about connecting with nature?
Boy. Well, no, this is interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because, here I am, having to, here I speak about what I'm talking about. I need to follow my own advice, which I am at this point, but up front, I did not. And that was my greatest weakness. And it almost literally killed me. In fact, I was so angry and so depressed, which is a dangerous combination, being a combat veteran. I developed some clots, which I don't have a proclivity to even getting, as determined by blood tests I had done. So it was obviously this emotional state and being sedentary for 2 months as I'm, gathering all my documentation and things that I'm submitting, to file grievances with various federal agencies. And I had a submassive pulmonary embolism, which literally almost killed me. And what I had and where it was and the size of it, I was told the mortality rate is actually 100%. So the fact I'm here is miraculous in itself. And after I recovered from that, I was still so devastated. I was so desperate. I was in such a deep and dark place. I had to do something, and I did an extreme thing, which was a therapeutic intensive with a gentleman in Pennsylvania involving shamanistic kinds of healing techniques from a Native American tradition, which he's been trained in and worked with Native Americans with, dream work, family constellations, which is a process by which you just kind of move through different things that you're setting up and objects that are representing certain things, that as things shift during the process of the intensive, you're actually not only clearing trauma for yourself, but actually for your whole ancestral line. And of course, that it also involved energy psychology interventions at the same time. So basically, I lived in the woods near his cabin in Pennsylvania. I was down there for 6 days, and the 4 days in the middle, I was fasting the whole time. I had to attend to a fire ceremoniously. He would come out all times, day and night, to do various interventions with me. And it was absolutely miraculous and profound. And at the end of that, I actually had a very strong reconnection with life and relationship in general that up to that point, I had not had at all. I was kind of withdrawing and being a homebody, most of the time up to that point. And this really helped turn things around for me. That actually helped me develop an attitude of gratefulness for a lot of things, so that no matter how bad things get, there's always something in the moment to be grateful for. And if you can bring that into the mix, that's very powerful and very healing. And there's some other things that I could get into, another time perhaps, regarding forgiveness, which I think is very profound, and not just in the forgiveness of others against our perpetrators, but even things that come up along the way where they might have even involved self-forgiveness. And those are things the forgiveness piece is something I'm beginning to embark upon here because of some things. And as I continue on with my self-care protocol.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that whole story, because I did, or when we've talked on the phone, I've just found it so compelling, in that idea that you had to kind of strip everything away and build it back up, I think is so important. And so, Dave, one of the things you and I have talked about is the role of faith and your sense of humor in all of this. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you feel your faith has sustained you, and where do you derive your inspiration from and your humor?
It's an interesting question. With everything that we've gone through, I'll explain part of it based on all the panelists I've been hearing, which it's like I felt like they were talking about me, throughout this whole process. And I always joke with my wife, who's a social worker as well. I said, if she ever wanted to do her PhD thesis, I guess I would be it. She could just do it completely on me. And you have to backtrack for a moment as well, because you got to put yourself in a certain perspective. Imagine I'm an Orthodox Jew. I was accused of treason, and I was told when I was suspended, I was told there's a good chance you're going to jail, and there's pretty much two penalties for treason. I don't know if you know what they are. It's either life imprisonment or it's a death penalty. And I was told you will go to jail. And you have to imagine 7, 8 FBI agents coming into your house on Saturday, which is our Jewish Sabbath, and taking your house apart, armed agents. And the lead agent coming in and saying, I told them not to do this. I told them it's a mistake. And he said that in a deposition. So you cannot not have a sense of humor, because if you don't, you'll go off the deep end. And I think that's how I grew up. Much to my wife's satisfaction, my 3 boys have my sense of humor. And they just have to deal with that on a constant basis. But I think if we recognize that we don't control things that happen, like someone said to me when you're writing the book, or I'm still dealing in the court system, and they said, well, you're looking for revenge. I said, no, not at all. Whatever happens to the people that are doing this, that's their problem. They have to live with it. That's not my problem. My problem is how I deal with it. My problem is recognizing that there's a higher entity out there that's controlling things. Whatever one believes what it is, it doesn't matter. And whatever challenges, I don't look at it as a test, whatever challenges we go through in life it's not if we pass or fail, it's how we deal with it. And I always try to teach my kids that too. And through this process, you have to, again, imagine all these agents coming into your house. And I'll never forget this. My daughter, who's 29 now, and my oldest son is 25 now, and they were like 1.5, 4.5 at the time. My daughter, for years afterwards, when anybody would come to the door she didn't know, she would start to scream. And she would say, don't let them in. You don't know who they are. Because it was a traumatic experience. That's not the kind of thing you forget. And I can forgive almost anything, but not what they did to my family. And the biggest problem from what I see is that no one wants to admit mistakes. No one wants to say, you teach your kids, you make a mistake, say you're sorry, fix it, and move on. The government there used to be this little cartoon, never having to say you're sorry. That's what the government is. There's no accountability. And everybody who really did everything to me was promoted or were given awards. And my job, as I always saw it, was my focus was the soldier in the field. I worked in survivability, and my job was to make sure these guys came home alive and in one piece. And I remember years after it happened, and I'm still dealing with it because I'm still fighting to get to not get fired. Literally, people Google my name and they won't work with me. And I remember going to a meeting. I can't get into the details of the meeting, but I was at a meeting. I was a physician, and she was dealing with a lot of the soldiers who were coming back in pieces from Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I was working on at the time was a program to look at vehicles like the Humvee and fix them, because they were not made to, they were going to get destroyed. That's what was going to happen. It was a given. And I remember her looking at me and she said, your job was to make sure those vehicles were in one piece, and they did their job. And she was literally crying. And she said to me, why didn't you do your job? And I said, I tried, and they would not let me. And she said, well, what happened to the people that stopped it? I said, they got promoted. And so resiliency, I've had viral meningitis 3 times. Stress is a deal breaker. Stress really does things, but I work out, there's faith. And I think one of the most important things that we have is our friends and our family. People that don't have that. I mean, the FBI, I was told this afterwards. The FBI, if they come into a neighborhood, they follow me for 24 hours a day for 6 months. They want to split you off from the community so you have nothing, and they try to drive you crazy. In my neighborhood, it's not going to work like that. It's a neighborhood of Holocaust survivors. My father was a Holocaust survivor. It's people that they knew what was going on, and the FBI would follow me. People in the neighborhood would follow the FBI. Literally, cars were following FBI cars, taking pictures of them, and it drove them nuts to the point where they were complaining to the U.S. prosecutor's office. So, if you don't have family and friends, it's going to be very, very problematic. And thank God, I was supported by my family and my friends. And I'm a workoutaholic, so I can work out, but you can't really until it's done. But what's the old adage? It ain't over till the fat lady sings. And right now, I don't hear any music. And I deal with things every single day because they literally have been trying to get rid of me. And as somebody who I won't mention said to me, because the Inspector General's office did a separate investigation, it was determined as anti-Semitism, and 6-month investigation turned out to 2 years. And we found out that they were going to scuttle my report, and they were called for doing that. And the report came out and said it was anti-Semitism. And the Army said, so what? We don't have to do anything about it. I think I'm one of the only people, at least at that time, that had a report that came out in my favor, and there was never a remedy. And that's the fault. Our system is not only broken, it doesn't exist for people who are whistleblowers. And we're the ones that have suffered from it. So I guess I have a lot more to say, but it's true that when I did go back to work after I was suspended, by the way, my security clearance was initially taken away, put back, and it was upgraded from a secret to a top secret, which shows you how much they messed up. And I remember when I went back to work, and the first day back at work, I remember I met a guy in the hall, a friend of mine, who I was walking with, and he looked very uncomfortable. And I looked at him, I said, are you uncomfortable around me? And he said, I don't want to be seen with you. I don't want them to do to me what they did to you. I said, okay, not a problem. So that's my reputation. As everybody talked about before, they destroy reputation. You can't get work, and they try to give you work. Right now, my work is essentially, I'm supposed to do inventory. I'm supposed to count pencils, pretty much. And I've got 2 doctorates, and I'm an engineer. And this is how I'm utilized. And not that I'm not the greatest engineer in the world, but you work on things long enough, you do it, and they can't utilize me for something else. And I've asked to be transferred, and people want me, and they refuse to transfer me because they're trying to get rid of me. And my name in the Inspector General's office, as I've been told, there's a 4-letter adjective that's attached to the appendage to the front of it whenever my name is mentioned there. So I'll leave you with that.
Okay, David, I appreciate all of that. So I think what we've been talking about, though, is sort of what makes you stay sane and be healthy in the face of all of this. And June and I have talked about meditation. She mentioned mindfulness and some of the training that she's done. So I'm going to ask her to explain to us a little bit more about mindfulness and those techniques, and how you can integrate mindfulness into your mentorship.
That's a broad question, because there's a lot of components to mindfulness that are brought in. As I said, serendipitously, every week, when I was studying, something happened in the office that week that I could utilize, that and implement it. The one example I must give is, I was triggered at work, and I just learned about, walking meditation, and I went down to my car in the basement, and I was so angry and so agitated. The first lap around the car took me about 5 seconds, but then you learn to drop into your body and, your breath, drop into your toes. So the second lap was a lot slower. And by the third lap, I was fully feeling my feet. I'd slowed down. It was just, heel toe, and there was nothing else in my head except, my walking, my breathing, and there weren't the thoughts in my head. So it definitely shifts you away into a space that's calmer, and where you can focus more. In other instances where, I knew the person I'm talking to knew that I was a whistleblower, and they saying things that are, blatant lies and that type of thing. And I'm focusing on my breath, focusing on listening to what he's saying intently. So all of these components came together to, help me through horrific times. Now, when I was studying mindfulness, somebody mentioned it previously, trauma-informed mindfulness is now recently been brought into, the teacher's training curriculum, so to speak. And at the time, for me, it wasn't there. And the peer support that we had at the time was more crucial to me than other areas where, it was lacking support. So during the journey, you learn to reach out, to find your tribe, as people have said. Now, because I'm single, I didn't have a partner or spouse or anybody to talk to. I saw very early on the damage it was doing to my family. So I deliberately decided to keep that part of my life as best I could away from them and out of the conversations, because, we're different personalities, and, people didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. So straight away, there was a sense of isolation. And then what does that do? It leaves you alone in your head. And with mindfulness and meditation, it helped to curb the rumination, going over it, and, the questioning, why are they doing this? Why is nobody helping me? All that type of thing. So there was a lot of time spent on literally looking after myself and utilizing every single technique that was around to help me through mindfulness. And we also say, mindfulness isn't a panacea. It doesn't work on its own. If you need medication, you need to be on the medication. And luckily, I had been put on antidepressants because I'd experienced that before in my life. And I was aware enough to know, I recognized these signs, I need additional help. So the mindfulness in and of itself just came along, at the perfect time. But after the fact, when my mindfulness training finished, I was isolated in a scary way, because there was just nobody. So I reached out again. I started looking around, and then I found mindful self-compassion. And, we say that's the second wing of what you need. You need mindfulness, but you also need the self-compassion component. And that's been, my every Tuesday night for the last 2 years. I did the course, the 8-week course, specifically for the self-compassion component. And I've been, utilizing that ever since. But in addition, and one thing that I know now, and I see now, especially over the last 6 months, the missing component that I didn't have was talk therapy. I've never had a consistent therapist to talk things through with. My conversations have been, when talking about it, were initially to attorneys, and the timelines and all the rigidity, but there was none of the emotional stuff was being spoken about. And that's reared its head, and that's still something that I'm needing to look into now and sort out. But I also believe that, when you're ready to get the lesson, the teacher will arrive. And, literally the last 2 months, other pieces, I call them golden nuggets, have been given to me, because the PTSD came out, a year later. And, connecting with you as well, Jackie, like you say, PTSD doesn't only wear a uniform. And I was shocked that, this is what I have, because it just never struck me that this is what it is. And lately, over the last couple of months, there's triggers that have been triggering, behavior that, normally mindfully I can, I see it coming. I know how to breathe through it. I know, don't judge the other person and let it go and all that kind of thing. But these triggers, I see it all clearly, and I still have a lid flip, and that lid flip takes you a good 20, on average about 20 minutes to calm down from that lid flip. So there's still a lot of learnings from myself, but most definitely mindfulness assisted me in ways that if I hadn't had it, I wouldn't be here today. And that's where, the suicidal ideations, I've had 3 specific instances. I even remember the dates, when you just woke up that, one morning and you go, oh, here you are again. What are we going to do? And then on one particular day, I reached out to the 3 different suicidal prevention hotlines we have here, and everybody sounded half asleep on the phone. Then I reached out to very few close friends that knew, and they were all busy. So that morning was spent, having to save myself. And I was so proud of the fact that I had the tools, I could implement them. And, when somebody said earlier, the baby steps, I had an incredible, we use poetry in mindfulness, and David White's poem, Start Close In, don't take the second step or the third. All I could hear in my mind was start close in. And if all you can do today is just lie in bed and rock yourself here, listen to the birds, get up, go get food and come back into bed, it's okay. You got to go at your own pace, and you have to give yourself what you need in that moment, because nobody else knows what you need in that moment. So, and the gaps between those thoughts and pressures and scenarios and stresses, they definitely increase. So you don't experience them as often, but when they're there, you need to know what to do in that moment if there's nobody else around.
Yes. Oh, June, I think what you just said is just so beautiful and so important, that we talk about suicide prevention a lot and how to recognize the signs and symptoms in others. We don't often focus enough on. So when there is no hotline to call and it's 4 o'clock in the morning and everybody else is asleep, how do you get yourself through that? And I think that is so important. And I mean, you just shared that so beautifully, and you're such a lovely lady. I'm so glad you're here with us. I'm so glad you're part of this network, that I want us to do more with mindfulness and some of the things that you're saying today. And I'm saying this on the video and with Christian and Paul going, what is she committing us to now? But I think we need to do more of this. And I think we need to do more of what you and Ted has talked about with some of this EFT as well, and bring these techniques to whistleblowers who have gone through these horrific experiences. I mean, I couldn't imagine having the FBI bust down my door and start raiding my house or follow me around the streets, and the challenges I hear people go through. And when Martina and I did our study, we found that half of the people endorsed suicidal ideation that responded to our whistleblower survey. So it's there, it's an underlying, and the fact that you guys are sharing such personal things about your health and your mental health and your how powerful this truly can be, I think is so important, because I think this is the conversation that we need to have that become the change agents of how we deal with whistleblowers in the future. And I want to turn a little bit here, because I kind of put this session, I made it almost 2 parts, that you all have used your experience to also be advocates, and there's been action that you've taken. Christian, you mentioned earlier that as an ombudsman, you had knowledge and you took what you knew about the law and you stepped out of your comfort zone and you stood before DC Council hearings and you made your point be known. What was that advocacy? What was that like?
It was very difficult for me. I'm an extremely private person. And so I even had to grieve the loss of my privacy. I know that sounds strange for some people, but since I knew that the message was really powerful and it needed to be heard, and since I was appropriately positioned to share that information, I felt I'm going to say burden, but a calling. I felt that I needed to do this, and it was bigger than me. And so I kind of had to adjust my own concerns. And so I did that. I initially started my advocacy when I was pro se. So I did a lot individually. I knew the structure of government in DC just because of my position as an ombudsman. I also knew the internal dialogue that that happened behind closed doors on the most high profile cases. And so even a retaliatory tactic they used to quiet me was to move me under general counsel of the agency. But what they didn't realize is I learned a lot. I learned the internal dialogue. I learned how they responded to litigation. I learned how they communicated with the different branches of government, to include the courts and the legislative branch, and even the executive branch, which for DC, the director of our agency is a cabinet level individual. They have to be appointed because DC government is so small. So I knew the actions that I was taking had a direct ear to the mayor. And so with the information, I decided the best way to address it was through public education, educating my council members, testifying in public. I purposely went on the video for some of the testimony because I knew there was a practice of watching the council hearings at the agency I worked with. And I knew there was a lot of fear because people looked to me as kind of the social worker that stood up to leadership. And as an ombudsman, when I was walked out, it sent a chill through the agency. So right after I was terminated, even though I didn't begin my testimony at that point in time, I went to the DC City Council hearing and purposely sat on camera just so that the social workers could see me. And it was powerful. It reached the social workers to the point where the administration funneled in all of the directors to sit in front of me. And so I was getting messages, go to the left, go to the right, move up one. So I think there are different messages for different people. As an ombudsman, I was appropriately situated to know how to reach very diverse groups. I don't think I would have had that same knowledge had I not kind of walked up the chain of command to the ombudsman as a social worker. But I believe we as social workers have to take back our industry and start leading our industry, which is part of the problem with a lot of industries, that social workers are the clinicians or the main practitioners, but then you have a director who has nothing to do with social work. So for us, I knew it was uncomfortable, but I knew I had to continue to step up. So I think knowing the structure of your government, being able to point to laws, knowing what you do so well to the point where the Attorney General's office themselves didn't know half of the mandated reporter laws. And so it just so happens an attorney was sitting in a class that I attended, and I was able to impact how they enforce sexual abuse laws in a district just through somewhere that I spoke on happenstance. So knowing your audience, knowing how to push people in the right direction. I think there's such a thing as positive peer pressure as well. Even when somebody doesn't want to do the right thing, they know that they don't want to look bad for not doing the right thing. So using litigation as a public platform to get the information out there, and coupling that with direct emails to the council members who there's a time stamped, I told you this was happening, Now, if we ever come to the point where I need to make that public, they also know that that email exists. So holding people accountable to their role to the community is imperative. And then also using the pressure of the federal litigation helped me out in the advocacy for the legislation. I think when you're a whistleblower and you're kind of what I consider to be a hot potato, you almost have to practice with humility. You have to let your ego go because other people are going to claim your work. So I had to start like a full-time job advocating in the community, working with partners who weren't willing to acknowledge they worked with me. I would have people testify at council who literally echoed what I told them or used my slideshow or PowerPoint word for word. And I had to come to a place of peace with that and give the knowledge freely. So I think that finding your path forward can be extremely powerful, but it's going to have to be extremely individualized. And it's easier to do when you understand the structure of your local government and what laws apply to you. And when someone challenges you, you're so well read or you've got enough expertise on the subject that you don't even have to look it up. You can just start quoting what you need to be factual, whether it's policy, procedure, or law. And so, I mean, when you combine all those tactics, I've also learned that I believe as a social worker in child welfare that mandated reporting is essential, and how we deal with the overpopulation or the overrepresentation of children of color and children in poverty and child welfare is to make sure that our front door through mandated reporters is accurate and they're adhering to their duty to our community. So I also do a lot of education and I teach classes because of the fact that I believe so importantly on us being able to protect our children. So you have to define what it is your goal is. How are you going to accomplish that goal and put realistic steps in it? And sometimes they're really tiny steps that take all of you right at the moment. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I've educated community members and walked away feeling beat up. But at the same point in time, they took everything I said to them and claimed it as their own. And I had to come to a place of happiness, knowing that the information getting out there was sufficient and it was enough. And as far as privacy goes, understanding that sometimes when you're working with vulnerable populations, that the cost of your whistleblowing is minute in comparison to other people we work with. And I think that holds true for almost everybody on this panel. Well, everyone on this panel and probably most whistleblowers I've worked with. For me, it was children. For Jackie, it was suicide. For David, it was combat. Ted, it was combat. June, I don't know your story well enough to go off the top of my head, but I'm positive it had an impact on the community that you meant for it to have an impact on.
So no, and I think those are a great way to kind of segue over to Ted, because I see you and Ted having done very similar things, you at the local level and Ted with Congress and the legislation that now exists because, you know, Ted wouldn't take no for an answer. So Ted, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened after you left the vet center in Rhode Island, that you didn't abandon your colleagues or your veteran patients, and you've turned your advocacy into action.
Well, so shortly after I left, the retaliation just picked up. They barred me from the vet center, threatened me that they call the police if I ever showed up because of counter accusations they were making against me, my director in particular, locally here in Rhode Island, who was painting me as a whacked out combat veteran who was mentally unstable and that kind of thing, which kind of gets into the mobbing and trying to turn my staff members, against me. But unfortunately, a couple of them didn't run for the tall grass. And in fact, they were able to come forth and submit interrogatories on my behalf, which was extremely helpful and supportive in substantiating some things going forward. And in fact, was actually critical in the recent no trespass order that was dropped by my director when I had gone to the vet center. I hadn't been there in 3.5 years since I left. I go there in March to drop off a memorial donation for a counselor I used to work with therefore, who had died from cancer, and in her obituary, that was her request to make a donation for veterans to vet center. And that's what I did. She wasn't, my director wasn't even there that day. I dropped it off, and she turns around, and I think in collusion with upper management decides this is what they're going to pull. But anyway, so as all that was going on, I contacted Senator Reed's staff, and worked very closely with them, and eventually Congressman Cicilline's people, and providing them with evidence and documentation, as it was alluded to before by someone, how important it is, from a previous panel, that you got to have your ducks lined up. You got to have, good documentation. You got to have witnesses and people that can come forth and substantiate what you're doing. So I'm gathering all that together, and eventually with the media interviews that went on, and I was on 2 broadcasts with NBC. But what's interesting about that, and what I've learned, because I'm green at this. This is the first time I've taken this on, and so as I was starting to work this with my congressional delegates, but because of the media attention I was getting at the national level, when I even went to Washington with an appointment for one of Senator Reed's staffers, NBC was following me right down the hallway into Reed's office, and don't think they didn't take note of that. And they paid attention. And this is kind of in part on top of my documentation, which I think helped perpetuate a government accountability office investigation to take place. As that was ongoing, I had more media interviews. So what I learned in that if you're going to be successful in this, one of the elements of success that's very important is you got to be working the media in tandem with the politicians and the people that are the centers of influence, that are the decision makers or that can promote policy. If you don't do those 2 things, you probably will not be successful. In fact, you won't. And even if you have that working for you, you still aren't necessarily going to, get to where you want to go and accomplish what. But at least you're doing what you can do with the resources become available to you. Because part of what I saw happen for me along the way, in spite of my persistence and diligence and ability to communicate, it wasn't all because of me, because there were elements that came about that I had no control over, that just sort of gravitated toward me along the way, that I had no control over. So it wasn't my success. It was kind of the grace of the universe at the same time, that just things kind of came to bear at the same time that helped perpetuate things forward. And just one quick example of that, when I did the articles done on me by the Military Times with all this, it was because of that article that NBC picked up on me and were vetting me for almost a year on my credibility and character before they would even contact me for the interview, I found out later. So those are some of the nuances and serendipity things that can happen along the way. So if you keep pushing forward, good things are going to happen, and things are going to gravitate towards you in that regard. And part of that is just knowing, if you do that, and having the faith that that can happen. So as this all continued to go forward, the investigation occurs by the GAO. September of last year, they validated my claims, made recommendations for corrective action. And because of my concerns about the VA's deceptive and gaslighting response to the GAO report, I got on a Zoom meeting with Cicilline and Reed's people and said, you beware, don't let them hoodwink you here, because here's what's really going on. Because what they're saying in their response is they're basically going to, oh yeah, we agree with your recommendations. Oh, but we're going to continue to do the same things we've been doing all along. Like, I'm reading this thing, it's like, I couldn't believe it. So I addressed those concerns in that meeting and in writing. They forwarded to the House and Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs late last year, because that was right around the time Senator Reed had initiated the Vet Center Improvement Act of 2021 as a result of all that. And Congressman Cicilline on the House side here in Rhode Island supported that as well. So that's currently in committee. What's amazing, they even let me have input on the language I wanted included in the bill, which I thought was like unbelievable. I never would have thought anything like that was possible. So it's in committee, waiting. I guess further things that they have to work on. There's one last piece of language I want included that they haven't already, and I think that's being worked on. I'll hear about that in the near future, and hoping for a vote. Doesn't appear to be any resistance to it by the end of the year, and it looks like there's more follow-up interviews coming. I know I have one with the cable network here in Rhode Island in October, on the status of where everything is at and so on. And I've got the legal things going at the same time against the VA and individual perpetrators that were responsible for all this. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, besides things going on with the book I referred to before. And it's currently my co-author's conducting interviews, and he's coming back to Rhode Island in 2 weeks. And this time, besides former colleagues and other counselors across the country, this time he's actually going to be interviewing some of my former clients. So that's kind of how it has all unfolded and where things are currently at.
And I know we're going to get short on time here, but I wanted to give June the opportunity to talk about the Zondo Commission for those of us who are not in South Africa, and I only know what it is because of June. Tell us about the Zondo Commission and the letter that you wrote.
So the Zondo Commission actually is just recently closed off hearing all witnesses. It's a commission that looked into what we've termed, or Advocate Thuli Madonsela termed, states of capture, where a lot of our government institutions were effectively captured by various persons and have literally they've stolen equivalent, well, not equivalent to, but I mean, the numbers that they're looking at are over $4 billion, 630 million rand. It's over $4 billion when I did the conversion. But it started in January 2018, and so Judge Zondo has, he's been presiding over this. They've even called our previous president, Jacob Zuma, because he is deeply implicated in it, but hasn't testified, and most recently, absconded and was arrested for not appearing in court, and he's now on parole, medical parole, which is also questionable. But generally, so what he did was he put a call out to the whistleblowers, because the whistleblowers were key in that whole state capture commission. The identities have been leaked. A lot of them have been threatened. What's crucial is that a lot of them, as myself, you don't have legal representation. You're expected to do things yourself, draw up your own affidavits. And you lose your work, as we all know, and yet they've all spoken out to, bring to light how these corrupt people and unethical people have pillaged our country. So he put out a call inviting us all to send in a letter, or not a letter, but send in suggestions, what needs to be changes to be done and all that type of thing. So in conjunction with different bodies, people have submitted various things, and I submitted a separate one from myself because for press and to get my story into the press is impossible, because it's a corporate that pays for a lot of marketing in the media, so nobody's going to touch it, and the media is only interested in state capture. So it was an opportunity for me to send a letter in stating this is where the problems happened with me. This is where I see, if I work the problem backwards, which is the way my brain works, the only way we can fix it is to A, B, and C. So the other thing is, because Jackie, I'd already met you, and I placed in there that the book coming out, the toxic tactics. There is a fundamental lacking in the way that the judiciary, auditors, investigators handle speaking to potential witnesses and slash whistleblowers. So all of this was placed in the letter and it was sent through. And as I say, we're waiting on his findings to come out soon. Who knows what he's going to suggest, because it's not going to be law, but we have a Protective Disclosures Act, which for us is sitting in the wrong court. It's in the labor court. Me personally, I think it should be in the criminal court, so that people could be held accountable for their crimes. And I also have a human rights case against Samsung, because for me, taking away our ability to earn income and, destroying us financially is a crime against humanity. So, a lot of these things are placed in the letter, and we'll see what comes out of it. But because it has to come from the top. But, if the top of the food chain is corrupt throughout, where do you turn then? So it's going to be vital to see what happens, because our country is at a very big tipping point at the moment.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I mean, I keep reiterating that this is very global and is happening all over the world. And I know we are over time. I did want to mention that Dave's actions were involved in him actually publishing his story in a book that he mentioned. And I think we've posted that in a chat, or we can post that in the chat, so that we're making the book and that story available to you still. I mean, Dave, do you want to give us like 2 minutes? And then we do have to close the session because we're supposed to be on break. And then we're coming back tonight for our night of giraffery. And we're going to be giving out awards and recognizing all the hard work that has gone into this conference and the great sponsors that have stood by us.
Sure. Thank you, by the way, for giving the opportunity to even be on this panel as well. You've done a great job with everything you're doing. The fact that you can interact with other whistleblowers, it's like you have people to speak to. So my book is really about, it's literally the story from up until a number of years ago, because it's still ongoing. It's like I said, I was accused based on my religion. And the people that did it are retired, in good standing. And as we know, whistleblowers are the ones that get the shaft. And
so how did you want to write this book, or did somebody come and ask you about doing this? Because I know Ted has also mentioned a book, and we've got a book with Springer, very different kind of book. But what's it like to, does a publisher, did they, somebody come to you, or did you go to somebody?
It's interesting. I had gone speaking, I'm not even sure the year, I had been speaking about my story. I've been invited to different places for a number of years. And I was invited to a place, the Holocaust Memorial Center in West Bloomfield, Michigan. And a friend of mine who was part of the ZOA said, "Hey, would you speak?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." And I said, "How many people do you think?" I said, "I think maybe it'll be 50. He said, "Maybe there'll be like 75. I got there. It started at 7:30. At 7:15, there were 500 people there. And I was shocked. I really didn't expect it, because it's not me, it's the story. And after I spoke, nobody left. And after I spoke, someone came up to me, it was a journalist, and said, "Don't speak again till you write a book. The book's got to get up. People have got to know about it." And again, I did write the book, but it read like my dissertation. You wouldn't want to read it. I fell asleep. So we got somebody to help write the book. And it became, and I actually had somebody approach me about making a movie as well. At that time, we weren't ready to do it, and we turned it down. But we just started getting back out again after COVID, and it goes through the whole story. And what it hasn't gone through is, I tell people now, they say, "It's all done." I said, "Well, actually, no, I was suspended about a couple months ago. They suspended me for close to a month." And why? because they told me to do something. I said, well, that's not my job. I don't even know how to do it. You're being insubordinate. You're suspended. They put me on AWOL. I had to take my son to the hospital. And they said to me, you know, we have to talk. I said, fine, we'll talk on the phone. No, you're AWOL. We're suspending you. And it's like, it's been a joke, as we all know, everybody, I know, June shaking her head. It's like, this is what we deal with. This is what we go through. You can go crazy. And one of the things I am trying to do is I'm trying to work with technology for PTSD and suicide prevention, because I think it's so important. We all, I don't care what any whistleblower says, we all suffer from PTSD to some extent. We all deal with different things a different way. And I can tell you for a fact, I went to my hierarchy and I said, we need to work on this. It's technology, it's part of our work. Nah, it's not important. I'm like, seriously? And these are the people we deal with every day. And I've been trying to go to congressional people too. I haven't had as much luck, but I applaud everybody that's been going through this, and not having, if you don't have anybody to speak to, you got to speak to another whistleblower, to speak to somebody who will pick up the phone at 1 o'clock in the morning and who will listen to you. And even when I was going through my case initially and I was facing jail, I didn't tell my wife everything that was going on. She didn't even know. She still doesn't know everything. Because not most of it, but two of my kids have said to me they will not read the book because they said they can't. It affects them too much. And the kids weren't even born then going on. Oh, wow. Whistleblowers are a breed unto themselves, unto ourselves.
Well, we're human giraffes.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, I don't know what we call whistleblower dummies. They should, for whistleblowers, for dummies, we should have a book out for something like that. But you have to recognize that the people such as yourselves that are sitting here and are people that are joining this forum I think are very special people. Not me, I'm just looking at the people and people such as yourself that have been really advocating for us. And that's what I've been trying to do too. So wish everybody the best of luck.
And David, I just want to say real quick, I have the same challenge you do with my book, which is why I have a co-author.
Yeah, well, actually, we did get a public. We went through a normal publishing agency. They wanted to do it. I said, hey, that's great. So now we're trying to get PR. We're trying to get journalists involved in my case, in all our cases, to recognize the problems that we all are dealing with. And it's something really journalists have to recognize. They'll look at your case or June's case or my case and say, it happened X amount of years ago. It's not media attention anymore, but it is, because it keeps on happening over and over again.
Right. That's what Martina Buck always says to me, that it's this conspiracy of silence, that if nobody's listening, just because it maybe happens just to you, when it happens to you, it happens to all of us. So when there's anti-Semitism, when there's discrimination, when there's harassment, when there's retaliation in the workplace, if we let them get away with it, it didn't just happen to you. It was a crime committed against humanity. And I think that's where having this network and having this voice is so important. And I mean, I would give everybody awards. We went through a process, and we're gonna come back on, I think at 5:30. We're gonna give you guys a chance to take a break, eat some pizza, and relax a little bit. And we are gonna, Kim Young McLear, who's also one of our board members, is the award committee chairperson, and she will be hosting tonight's events. Paul will have some more information. We created, or we sort of found this giraffe drink and giraffe awards. So, and we've talked to June about maybe doing some more giraffe things, being that South Africa is the actual home of the giraffe. She maybe have to become our giraffe liaison and sort of lead the herd. Or what we discovered the other day, a group of giraffes is called a tower. So I thought, I love that. And then I saw somebody put in the chat about, because the giraffe is so tall and has such great vision, when there's danger, the other animals in the area are going to follow the giraffe. I don't know if I'm getting all that right, but I just love the imagery that somebody put in the chat earlier about sort of the nobility of the giraffe to lead and be that visionary. So I thank all of you, and I look forward to seeing you all a little bit later. And we will be giving out some giraffe awards. So stay tuned.